It was a stormy October night in 1994 when everything changed for the Carter family. 9-year-old twin sisters Emily and Sophie Carter had spent the afternoon playing near the edge of their family's rural property in southern Wisconsin. The farmhouse where they lived was old, built by their great-grandfather, and sat tucked between dense woods and long-forgotten cornfields. That day, thunder rolled across the sky like distant drums, but inside the house, everything felt calm. The girls had hot cocoa after dinner, drew pictures in their shared notebook, and curled up in their beds with stuffed animals tucked under their arms. Their parents, Alan and Margaret Carter, did what they always did: kissed the girls goodnight around 8:30 p.m., checked that the doors were locked, and went to bed themselves not long after. A heavy rain began to fall outside. Wind howled through the trees, and branches scraped the windows like fingernails. But that wasn't unusual. The family had lived there for years. Storms came and went. At 7:04 a.m. the next morning, Margaret woke up to silence. It was the kind of silence that made her heart beat faster, though she didn't know why at first. She went to the girls' room to wake them for school and froze in the doorway. Both beds were empty. The window was closed. Nothing looked disturbed, but when she rushed downstairs and opened the front door, what she saw made her knees buckle. The doormat was soaked. Just beyond the porch steps were muddy footprints, 2 small sets, leading down the gravel path and toward the woods. Alan called 911 immediately. Within an hour, sheriff's deputies arrived, followed by state police. A search began almost instantly. Helicopters from Madison were dispatched. Bloodhounds were brought in. Dozens of local volunteers, neighbors, church members, even high school students, formed search lines and combed through the dense underbrush. The twins' backpacks were missing, and so were their raincoats. That was the only sign that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't a violent abduction. Maybe the girls had left on their own. But why would 2 9-year-olds wander off in the middle of a stormy night? Investigators questioned the parents extensively, but no red flags were found. Alan and Margaret had clean records. There were no custody disputes, no family drama, no recent moves. The girls weren't known for running away or causing trouble. By all accounts, they were cheerful, kind, and deeply bonded to each other. The only thing detectives found mildly curious was a journal the girls kept together. In it were dozens of childlike sketches, trees, animals, stories about a secret clubhouse in the woods. But one recurring theme kept appearing in their notes: the tall man who watches from the trees. At first, authorities dismissed it as imagination, just spooky stories told by kids during sleepovers. But then a neighbor, a retired teacher named Mrs. Dawson, came forward with a strange memory. About 2 weeks before the girls vanished, she'd seen a tall figure wearing a raincoat standing at the edge of the woods behind the Carter home. She assumed it was a local hunter or hiker. But when she turned back for a second glance, he was gone. That lead went nowhere. The FBI was brought in 48 hours after the disappearance, and the case quickly made national headlines. "Twin sisters missing without a trace," read the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. Talk shows interviewed child psychologists and former detectives, and armchair investigators shared theories on early internet forums. Despite the attention, no credible leads emerged. No ransom notes, no confessions, no sightings beyond the muddy footprints and 2 empty beds. For weeks, the Carters kept their porch light on, hoping the girls would return. They never moved from the farmhouse. Emily's and Sophie's bedrooms were left untouched. Their toothbrushes stayed in the bathroom. Margaret said she couldn't bear to throw away their cereal bowls. Eventually, as weeks turned to months and months into years, the search efforts dwindled. Authorities began treating the case as a probable abduction and presumed homicide. But without bodies or suspects, it remained technically open. Some in town whispered theories. that the girls were lured by someone they trusted, that the parents knew more than they admitted, that the nearby woods hid something older, darker, something that didn't want to be found. By the time the 10th anniversary came around, the twins' names were etched onto a local memorial stone alongside other children who'd gone missing across the state. But the Carters never gave up. Every year on October 17th, they held a candlelight vigil. They kept their landline active, just in case someone ever called. And in the spring of 2022, something finally did emerge. Not a phone call, but a discovery that would change everything. The FBI was brought in within 48 hours. From the moment they arrived, it was clear this wasn't going to be a straightforward missing persons case. 2 9-year-old girls vanishing without a trace, in the middle of nowhere, on a stormy night? It sent chills down the spines of even the most seasoned investigators. Something about it felt deeply unnatural. The agents began interviewing everyone within a 30-mile radius: farmers, gas station attendants, store owners, mail carriers. Everyone remembered the Carter twins. Emily was the shy one, always holding her sister's hand. Sophie was the bolder twin, usually speaking for both of them. They were inseparable, known for their matching dresses and quiet smiles. No one could imagine anyone wanting to harm them. The first serious lead came when a neighbor, 5 miles away, reported seeing headlights heading toward the Carter property around midnight on the night of the disappearance. But due to the storm, visibility had been poor, and the witness couldn't describe the vehicle beyond saying it was dark-colored and quiet. Tire tracks were discovered near the edge of the Carter land, but rain had washed away any usable impressions. Suspicion first fell on a local farmhand named Roy Dillard. He was in his early 40s, lived alone, and had a past conviction for burglary back in the 1980s. He'd occasionally helped the Carters with field work, but swore he hadn't been near their house that night. Roy was interrogated for hours. His alibi, drinking alone in his trailer, couldn't be confirmed, but no physical evidence ever linked him to the girls. Still, whispers followed him for years. Another lead surfaced when investigators learned that a traveling carnival had passed through town just days before the disappearance. Some speculated that someone from the fair, someone transient who wouldn't draw attention, might have scoped the area for an opportunity. A background check on carnival workers turned up a few petty crimes, mostly drug possession or traffic violations, but nothing connecting anyone to the missing girls. Carnival workers were long gone by the time the investigation caught up. Posters were made and distributed statewide, then across the Midwest. Flyers with Emily and Sophie's faces appeared in gas stations, diners, and schools. Billboards went up. The Carters even appeared on a national morning talk show, pleading for anyone with information to come forward. The family offered a $50,000 reward, money they didn't really have, but were willing to borrow or sacrifice for the chance of a tip. Leads came in, hundreds of them, from every state. Someone claimed they saw 2 girls matching the description in a rest stop in Utah. Another tip placed them on a beach in Florida. A psychic from Tennessee called in, claiming the girls were being held in a red barn. Every lead was followed, every tip investigated. But one by one, they all fell apart. Wrong girls, old sightings, hoaxes, delusions, dead ends. By 1996, 2 years after the girls went missing, the case grew quieter. The FBI reassigned agents to newer cases. Local police had already exhausted their resources. The media moved on to the next big headline. But the Carters never gave up. The family remained in the farmhouse for another 2 years. Emily and Sophie's room was kept just as it had been. 2 twin beds, matching bedspreads, dolls neatly arranged on the shelves, storybooks stacked by the window. Every birthday was marked with a cake. Every Christmas, 2 presents were wrapped and placed under the tree. Hope lingered, until it couldn't. In 1998, For years after that night, the Carters moved out of the farmhouse. It wasn't a decision made lightly, but the memories, the pain of walking past their room every day, of seeing their shoes still by the door, of hearing the wind rattle the same windows that had once framed their laughter, it became too much. They left behind everything. The furniture, the toys, even the girls' backpacks that were never recovered. It was as if the house itself had become a memorial and a burden. After they left, the farmhouse stood untouched. Locals whispered about it being haunted. Kids dared each other to go near it on Halloween. But no one stayed long. Something about that place carried weight. A sadness that seeped into the floorboards. Nature took over. Vines climbed the porch. Weeds cracked through the driveway. The once white paint peeled like old skin. From a distance, it looked like any other abandoned house. But those who remembered knew it was more than that. It was the place where innocence had been stolen, where a mystery had been born and left unanswered. The town of Ash Hollow, once quiet and tight-knit, was forever changed. Some people moved away, unable to live with the unanswered questions. Others stayed, their routines a way to keep memory alive. The case of the Carter twins became local legend, passed down like folklore. But beneath the rumors and theories was a raw, real wound that never truly closed. Even after 25 years, the farmhouse remained a symbol, a hollow shell of hope, grief, and mystery. And while most had stopped believing the girls would ever be found, alive or otherwise, a few still hoped. Some said they had dreams. Others said they felt the twins' presence on foggy mornings. But for the rest of the world, the story of Emily and Sophie Carter was a chapter left unfinished. That was until a strange event in the summer of 2022 changed everything. In 2022, nearly 28 years after the disappearance, the old Carter farmhouse was finally sold. Time had not been kind to the place. Its roof sagged, vines choked the outer walls, and the wooden porch creaked with every breath of wind. But to Emma and Daniel Harper, a young couple from Chicago looking for a rustic escape, it had charm. They planned to turn the once-abandoned home into a cozy bed and breakfast, unaware they were stepping into a house shrouded in tragedy. Their second week of renovations began with cleaning out the attic. Dust hung in the air like smoke, disturbed by every step and sweep of their brooms. Old trunks, yellowing newspapers, and broken furniture filled the space. Daniel was prying apart a water-damaged dresser when he noticed something strange. A wall that didn't match the others. The boards were newer, oddly placed, almost like a patch job. With curiosity piqued, they carefully removed the loose boards. Behind them was a crawl space. Small, tight, and silent. A place untouched for decades. Inside lay a dusty box. It was cardboard, collapsed slightly from moisture and time. Emma hesitated before opening it, as if sensing something sacred was inside. And when she did, her breath caught. Children's drawings. Faded, but still colorful. Crayons and markers on rough paper. Two stick-figure girls holding hands under a bright sun. One labeled me, the other my sister. Dates scribbled in shaky handwriting. October 1994, Halloween. Emily plus Sophie forever. There were also shoes, tiny, mismatched, scuffed, and dirty. But what made Emma's hands tremble were two charm bracelets, tarnished but clearly engraved. Emily. Sophie. She dropped the box and called Daniel. He stared for a long time before grabbing his phone and dialing local authorities. Within hours, the area was sealed off. Crime scene tape fluttered in the cold wind. Forensic teams arrived from Madison. The FBI reopened the case with renewed urgency. The box had been preserved well enough that fingerprints were still recoverable. The bracelets were cross-checked against items listed in the original case files. They were an exact match to ones the Carter girls were known to wear every day. Photographs confirmed it. But it wasn't just about identifying lost belongings. The hidden crawl space raised a terrifying question. Had the twins ever left the house at all? Over the next week, a full excavation of the farmhouse was conducted. Floors were torn apart, walls stripped down to their beams. Cadaver dogs were brought in, sniffing every inch of the property. Then in the basement, beneath a layer of cracked concrete, they found something. A trapdoor, nailed shut from the outside. Beneath it, a crawl space. And within, a set of skeletal remains. 2 sets, positioned side by side, one wearing the faint remains of a pink dress, the other with a rusted barrette still clipped to the skull. DNA tests would take weeks, but everyone already knew. It was Emily and Sophie. The story broke across national headlines. Missing twins found after 28 years, remains discovered in childhood home. Investigators turned their attention to the Carter family's past. The original case had focused outward, strangers, nearby fair workers, even neighbors. But now, the focus shifted inward. Suspicion swirled around the parents, Margaret and Thomas Carter, who had passed away in 2015. Their alibis had always been airtight, their grief real. But there were inconsistencies. Old CPS reports showed that in 1993, there had been anonymous complaints about screaming heard from the house and signs of neglect. But no charges were ever filed. A now-retired detective came forward, admitting that one interview had always troubled him. An uncle, Richard Carter, who lived on the property for a brief time in the early 90s. He was a drifter, known to be volatile, and had a criminal record involving child endangerment in another state. But he vanished shortly after the girls disappeared and was never located. Authorities tracked down Richard Carter in a hospice care facility in Montana. Terminally ill and unresponsive, he could no longer be questioned. But in his belongings was a disturbing discovery. A photograph of Emily and Sophie in what appeared to be a dimly lit basement, curled up together on a mattress. It was dated November 1994. The FBI couldn't confirm whether the girls had died the night they vanished, or were kept hidden for some time. The presence of old toys, books, and faded food wrappers in the crawlspace suggested they may have lived for days, or longer, beneath the very feet of search parties, family, and friends. The implications were devastating. The town of Wautoma mourned again, this time not with confusion, but horror. A candlelight vigil was held outside the old farmhouse, with locals leaving teddy bears, letters, and handmade bracelets on the porch. The house, once meant to be a sanctuary, was demolished. In its place, the town plans to build a children's memorial park, dedicated to the lives of Emily and Sophie Carter. Their story became a chilling reminder of the dark secrets ordinary places can hide, and the long shadows they cast over generations. And yet, in the heartbreak, there was something else, closure. A truth long buried finally brought into the light. Because no matter how many years pass, some whispers never stay quiet. Investigators returned to the old Carter farmhouse in the spring of 2022, armed with modern scanning equipment, thermal sensors, and a team of cadaver dogs. What had once been a chilling mystery from decades ago was suddenly alive again. Whispers of the twin girls who vanished on a stormy night in 1994 filled the rural town once more. The property had decayed with time. Ivy covered most of the exterior. The porch sagged dangerously, and inside, dust blanketed every surface like forgotten snow. The new owners, shaken but cooperative, allowed the team full access. They hoped for answers as much as anyone, but no one expected what would soon unfold. It was the girls' old bedroom that drew the most attention. Still intact after all these years, the wallpaper, faded pink with stars, barely clung to the damp walls. One of the cadaver dogs, a golden Labrador named Milo, began pawing persistently at the worn wooden floor near the far corner. At first, investigators assumed it was a false alert, but Milo kept returning whining, ears lowered, refusing to move on. Using ground-penetrating radar, they detected something beneath the floorboards, anomalies that didn't align with typical foundation patterns. The boards were carefully removed, one by one. That's when they found it. A narrow shaft, no wider than a laundry chute, sealed with layers of brick, plaster, and thick insulation. Whoever closed it off had done so with intention. As the debris was cleared stale, musty air rose from below. The team descended slowly into the tight space, flashlights slicing through the darkness. What they discovered was a small, crudely built underground chamber, no larger than a walk-in closet. The walls were made of old stone and dirt, with wooden support beams barely holding shape. Inside, time had stood still. Two twin mattresses lay side by side on the dirt floor, still covered in faded bedding patterned with cartoon animals from the early 90s. A pile of old toys sat nearby, plastic figurines, a cracked Etch-a-Sketch, and a pair of stuffed rabbits with missing eyes. Tucked in one corner was a rusted cassette player, long dead, surrounded by a small stack of tapes. Someone had once brought comfort down here, but it was the walls that froze the entire team. Scrawled in childlike handwriting were names, dates, and tally marks, dozens of them. As investigators examined them closer, it became evident what they were: height measurements, updated regularly. One section read Emily, 10 years old, and beside it, Sophie, 10 too. More entries followed, like diary pages written without ink, just lines on a wall, desperate to mark time passing in silence. It became clear this wasn't a place the girls had stumbled into. It was a place they had been kept. At the far end of the room, beside an overturned wooden stool, were two small skeletal forms, curled toward one another as if in an embrace. The bones were fragile, delicate, and unmistakably human. They lay gently positioned under what appeared to be a carefully draped blanket, now mostly disintegrated by time. On their wrists were the same charm bracelets discovered earlier, each one bearing a name: Emily and Sophie. The silence in the chamber was unbearable. Even the investigators, trained for the worst, stood in stunned stillness. DNA analysis confirmed the heartbreaking truth days later. The remains belonged to the Carter twins. News of the discovery swept through Wisconsin and beyond. Headlines blared, communities mourned, and the Carter family, now living in Minnesota, were contacted immediately. The mother collapsed upon hearing the news. The father wept, his hands trembling as he clutched the phone. For nearly 3 decades, they had lived with the ache of not knowing, of endless what-ifs. Now they had an answer, but not the one they had ever hoped for. As investigators pieced together the evidence, the horror only deepened. The cellar had been concealed expertly. Not a single blueprint or structural plan indicated its existence. Whoever had built it knew the house intimately, likely someone close. A former neighbor who had done carpentry work for the Carters in the early 90s became a person of interest. He had a prior record for unlawful confinement, but he had died in 2007. The true events of what happened to the girls during their time below the house may never be fully known. Forensics estimated they survived for months, possibly longer, based on food remnants, worn-down items, and the growth markings on the wall. But eventually, the drawing stopped. The measurements halted. Something changed. Whether it was illness, starvation, or abandonment, the chamber had become their final resting place. The FBI's forensic psychologist noted the arrangement of the remains. The twins clutching each other even in death was a haunting testament to their bond. Emily and Sophie had faced the unthinkable, but they had faced it together. Their story spread online, drawing millions into their decades-long mystery. Candlelight vigils were held across towns and cities, people leaving twin stuffed animals, drawings, and handwritten notes at makeshift memorials. The farmhouse, once abandoned, became a symbol of lost innocence, and the resilience of two little girls who, even in darkness, held on to each other until the end. The journal was small, its pages yellowed with time, and bound together with a string of blue ribbon now frayed and fragile. Investigators found it tucked beneath one of the mattresses, sealed in a plastic bag alongside a worn-out pencil. On the first page, in shaky block letters, was the name Emily Carter. What followed broke every heart in that investigation room. Emily's entries began on October 14, 1994, the night she and her sister disappeared. She described being awakened by whispers at the window. A man, whom she called the man from the barn, stood just beyond the glass, calling softly for them to come outside. He promised he had kittens to show them, that he needed help keeping them warm from the storm. Emily admitted that she and Sophie, being lovers of animals and full of childlike trust, slipped out of bed without waking their parents. They tiptoed out the front door, leaving it slightly open as the storm howled around them, and followed the man into the darkness. She wrote how he didn't take them far, just into the woods behind the house. There, hidden beneath an old pile of branches and tarp, was a wooden door set into the earth. Below it was the space that would become their prison. The man told them it was a secret fort, somewhere special just for them, a place to play with the kittens. There were no kittens. Emily's writing changed as the days passed. The first few entries were still hopeful. She described how Sophie made up songs to keep their spirits up, how they counted spiders on the ceiling, how they listened for their parents' footsteps. She wrote about hearing voices above, searchers, dogs barking, even helicopters. But the man told them to be quiet. "They'll find you soon," he said. Just a little longer. But they were never found in time. The journal darkened with each entry. Emily described the food running out, small boxes of crackers and cans of fruit. The man brought less, and less each time he visited. Then, one day, he didn't come at all. By entry 23, Emily was trying to keep Sophie calm, writing that Mom and Dad must be close by. She described how they huddled together at night, counting each other's heartbeats to fall asleep. Sophie had begun to get weaker. She cried more. Emily tried to save food for her. By entry 30, the writing became jagged. Misspellings crept in. Emily wrote about the cold, about missing the sun, about being scared of the dark. "I want to go home. Please, if you read this, we were good girls. We didn't do anything wrong." Entry 36 was barely legible. Emily tried to stay hopeful for Sophie's sake, but she also wrote that they hadn't heard a sound above them in days. She feared the world had moved on. The last entry, number 37, was just a sentence. "I don't think Sophie will wake up again." It ended there. Investigators sat in silence when the journal was read aloud. These weren't just entries. They were cries for help frozen in time. Moments of innocence slipping away inside a forgotten hole beneath their own home. Autopsies confirmed the heartbreaking truth. The girls had starved to death, likely within weeks of their disappearance. They had remained together until the end, their small bodies wrapped in each other's arms, as if even in death, they refused to be separated. The journal provided more than just emotional weight. It offered critical evidence. A single hair had been caught in the binding of the final page, tangled in the seam. Forensic testing matched it to Walter Griggs, a former handyman who had worked sporadically at the Carter farmhouse in the early 1990s. Griggs had never been a suspect. He was a quiet, unassuming man in his late 50s at the time, known for keeping to himself. He had lived alone in a trailer park on the edge of town. He died of a heart attack in 2002, never questioned, never charged. Neighbors remembered him as odd but harmless. One woman recalled he used to watch the Carter twins from the road, always offering to help the family with odd jobs. No one ever suspected he was capable of such evil. Investigators found no direct link between Griggs and the kidnapping. No written confession, no recorded statements. But the journal, the matching hair sample, and a surviving set of fingerprints on the inside of the crawlspace wall were enough to confirm what had long been feared. He had abducted the girls, imprisoned them beneath their own home, and left them to die. The fact that the girls had never been taken far, that they had lived and died within feet of where they slept, haunted everyone. It shattered the hearts of the town, of the agents on the case, and of every parent who had followed the story for nearly 3 decades. Emily's journal was preserved, and with the Carter family's blessing, a portion of it was displayed in a traveling exhibit on cold cases titled Echoes in Silence. The farmhouse was eventually torn down in 2023, and in its place now stands a memorial garden. At its center, 2 white benches facing a tree planted in the twins' memory. A bronze plaque reads, "In loving memory of Emily and Sophie Carter. Their light lives on in every child we protect." Their story reminds us of the fragility of innocence and the lasting cruelty of evil that hides in plain sight. But it also reminds us of resilience, for even in the darkest space imaginable, 2 sisters held onto each other, and to hope, until their very last breath. News of the discovery spread quickly. People across the country remembered the girls from old flyers and news specials. The town of Millbury held a candlelight vigil. Hundreds gathered to mourn and to apologize for forgetting. A memorial garden was planted where the farmhouse once stood. For years, rumors swirled that the house was cursed, but no one imagined the truth was buried beneath the very floorboards. The saddest part? The girls were never far from home. They had died just feet from where their parents had once called their names into the night. The Carter family, now in their 60s, returned to the old town of Millbury in early spring. The air still carried the scent of pine and rain, and the fields surrounding what used to be their farmhouse were just beginning to turn green again. It had been decades since they last walked these roads. Roads once filled with hope, heartbreak, and a kind of silence they could never quite escape. They arrived quietly. No press, no cameras. Just a handful of people who still remembered. The town had changed. New houses stood where old ones had fallen, but the space where the farmhouse once stood, now cleared and turned into a small memorial garden, remained untouched by time. It was quiet there, almost sacred. A simple wooden bench sat beneath a cherry blossom tree, with 2 nameplates etched in brass: Emily Carter and Sophie Carter. Flowers had been left by strangers, stuffed animals, notes written by people who had never met the girls, but had grown up hearing their names whispered in classrooms, church halls, and bedtime prayers. Mrs. Carter knelt beside the bench, clutching the 2 charm bracelets recovered from the crawlspace. Her hands shook. "We never stopped hoping," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even when the world forgot. We didn't." Mr. Carter stood beside her, eyes distant. He had once searched these woods every day, shouting their names until his voice gave out. Now, he just stood there quietly, as if afraid that any sound might disturb the peace that had finally returned. The FBI had called the case one of the most haunting unsolved crimes in the Midwest. But now that it was closed, it left behind more than just answers. It left scars, wounds that never truly healed, only learned how to ache quietly. Agents and officials who had worked the case, both past and present, attended the private memorial. Some spoke, others simply stood in silence. One senior investigator admitted, "This case never left us. It was one of those that just hung in the air. Even after retirement, we still looked over our shoulders hoping for a break. And when that break finally came, when the farmhouse revealed its secret, the weight of the decades came crashing down." But Emily and Sophie's story became more than just another cold case file. It became a symbol of the children still missing. A reminder that not every door stays closed forever. That sometimes, even after nearly 3 decades, the truth claws its way out from the darkness. The details still haunted the agents who read the journal pages. A child's handwriting, simple words, descriptions of days that blurred into nights, of hunger, of whispers in the dark, of the fear that grew with every footstep overhead. Emily had tried to protect Sophie, just as older siblings often do. She wrote about keeping her warm, singing softly, promising they'd be found. But no one ever came, and somewhere in those final entries, the words stopped. The killer, Walter Griggs, had lived less than 3 miles away. He had attended church, shopped at the same grocery store, said hello to the Carter family more than once. No one ever suspected a thing. He died in 2002, taking the secret with him to the grave. A quiet man with a dark past that no one had seen coming. What made it worse was the simplicity of it all. The crawl space had always been there. It had been beneath their feet the entire time. But sealed behind thick insulation, bricks and time, it became invisible. And the twins became ghosts. For years, locals said the house was cursed. That strange noises came from the fields. That shadows moved behind closed windows. Kids dared each other to sneak up to the porch at night, not realizing how close they were to a real nightmare. When news of the discovery broke, the nation responded with shock and sorrow. Old classmates of Emily and Sophie, now adults with children of their own, posted tributes. One wrote, "I remember Sophie loved drawing stars. She gave me one once, folded into a paper heart. I still have it." The town of Millbury held a candlelight vigil. Hundreds gathered. There were no speeches, just music, tears, and the shared weight of long-delayed grief. For years, the story had lived in the margins of old newspapers. But now, it was center stage, and people came not just to mourn, but to apologize, to admit that they had moved on while the girls were still waiting. The memorial garden, though small, became a place of healing. People from across the state visited. Some brought flowers, others left notes. One visitor wrote, "You were never alone. We just didn't know where to look." And maybe that's the part that cuts deepest, because the girls weren't taken across the country. They weren't buried in some distant place. They were right there, just beneath the boards, just beneath the noise, dying quietly as the world above moved on. The Carter family never blamed anyone. Not the town, not the police, not even the FBI. They only ever wanted the truth. And now that they had it, there was nothing left to wait for. They returned to their new home later that week, bracelets still in hand. But this time, the silence felt different. It wasn't filled with questions or what-ifs. It was the silence of two souls finally laid to rest. Emily and Sophie had once shared everything: birthday cakes, toys, secrets. In the end, they shared a fate no child should ever face. But even in that darkness, they had each other. They held on, and that final embrace, discovered 28 years later, told the world everything it needed to know. That love doesn't fade, that memory doesn't die, and that even the smallest voices can echo through generations. The farmhouse is gone, torn down, reclaimed by grass and sky. But their names remain, in the garden, in the journal, in the hearts of everyone who hears their story. Two little girls, one final embrace, and a truth that, once uncovered, will never be buried again.